Karina Haythorpe, Federal President of the Australian Education Union. Tonight's budget is welcome news for teachers and families right across Australia. We see the Albanese government's $16.5 billion commitment to fund public schools properly come to life in this budget. That will provide more resources on the ground for teachers and more help for those students who need it with their learning. We also welcome the cost of living measures, which will provide much needed relief for our members working in preschool schools and TAFE. And those cost of measures, the cost of living measures, particularly the Commonwealth prac payment and also student debt relief, are great attraction and retention mechanisms to make sure that we can attract people into the teaching profession. And with TAFE, tonight's budget locks in a further 100,000 positions every year from 2027 with free TAFE, which is life-changing for students right across the nation and making sure that a broad range of people can actually access vocational education in TAFE, the public provider. Thank you.
You okay?
Name's position.
Yeah, sure. It's Ina Strillox, the Chief Executive of the Australian Industry Group. This is a very modest budget, unfortunately, that won't shift the economic dial for Australia or Australians. It doesn't do anything to boost productivity, to boost investment and to drive growth. Unfortunately, we set a series of tests or asked for the budget that it cut down on business costs, which are exploding, that it provides the circumstances for the private sector to grow more, that it does drive up productivity, and it begins the conversation and action around long-term tax reform in the country. Unfortunately, on all of those measures, the budget has failed to deliver. There are a couple of areas which are of real concern to the business community out of this budget. The first is the decision made at this stage to not proceed with the instant asset write-off program, which is currently in place. There's no mention of it within the budget. This has been incredibly valuable for Australian businesses over many years, and its absence from the budget is a real concern. It's a kick in the teeth for Australian business, and we hope that over the next few weeks leading into the election that omission is rectified. Secondly, the decision to get rid of non-compete clauses for most Australian workers is also of deep concern to Australian business. Australian businesses, large and small, spend a tremendous amount of resources hiring, engaging, training and building up their staff. And to now risk having lost that and losing all the intellectual property that has been built up is going to be a huge concern for Australian business. And we suspect that if this measure does go ahead, in the months and years ahead, we will see an enormous amount of litigation, legal action around this measure, and also the rewriting of hundreds of thousands of contracts for Australian workers to try to protect employers and their rights. Unfortunately, in the budget, it tells us that we're in a deep economic trough at the moment. Inflation is expected to increase, business investment is expected to decrease. There are some real alarming signs around where the economy is at the moment. Growth projections have been downgraded again twice now this year, so growth this year is now only expected to be 1.5%, not the 2% that was projected in May of last year in last year's budget. That tells us that our economy is in trouble. The fastest growing number in the budget is the payment of government debt, the interest on government debt. That's expected to increase by 9.5% in the period ahead. That tells us that with a budget deficit of $42.1 billion and a decade of deficits ahead, that we are in for some hard economic times, and unfortunately the budget doesn't do much to address the big concerns that we have. The other issue that we have too is the real growth in the public sector. We've seen the public service grow by 12,000 people in the past year. 5 out of 6 of those jobs are direct employees. That tells us where the priorities are at the moment. Costs of running the public sector have gone up by $17 billion, or just about 17% in the past year. And we would hope that over time, that focus on driving the public sector rather than the private sector changes from within the government. The private sector is the engine room of the Australian economy, and there's not much in it from this budget. Thank you.
All set. I'm Andrew McKellar, Chief Executive of the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Our concern is that this budget lacks vision and lacks a strategy. It's very much a pre-election budget with a sugar hit driven by some further personal income tax cuts. There's no longer term strategy to drive stronger economic growth or to underpin future productivity or competitiveness. As expected, the budget projects a return to ongoing structural deficit in the years ahead, and that's going to make it very difficult for the economy to prepare for any future challenges and also to undertake essential reforms that must be put in place if we are to boost productivity and competitiveness. We're particularly disappointed that the budget does not present a coherent strategy for many hundreds of thousands of small businesses who are doing it tough in the current economic environment. Unfortunately, there seems to be pretty much a random list of measures, many of them re-announcements in terms of the small business outlook that's presented there. In particular, it seems that the government has not at this point announced an extension of the instant asset write-off. This is a very important measure for many small businesses. It only compounds the failure of the government to secure passage of the measure that was presented in last year's budget. So that's something we would certainly urge the government to reconsider, get that legislation passed, provide an extension of that instant asset write-off. It should be legislated on a permanent basis in the tax system, and it should be extended to cover much more than just the small businesses that are currently projected. It should be increased to an amount of $50,000, and it should be provided to businesses with a turnover of up to $50 million. We think that would have a much more significant benefit across the economy. Thank you.
Gorgie Dent, CEO of the Parenthood. Tonight's budget includes a historic $5 billion down payment on building a truly universal early childhood education and care system. It includes $3.6 billion to improve the wages of early childhood educators and teachers. It includes $1 billion to build or expand early learning services in 160 areas where they're needed most. It includes $426 million to remove the old activity test and replace it with a 3-day guarantee, moving Australia closer to the transformation, the transformative reform that universal early childhood education and care would deliver this country. We know that when children have access to high quality early education and care, they do much better over the course of their lives. We believe that every child should be entitled to this opportunity. The federal government has made a commitment to ultimately building out a universal high quality early education and care system that is simple and affordable for families. We have got much more work to do in terms of reform around funding to address affordability, around strengthening regulatory standards and enforcement, around increasing oversight. But it is really important to recognise that this is a historic and unprecedented investment in some of the structural foundations we need to be able to ultimately build a universal high-quality early childhood education and care system.
Hi, my name is Kristen O'Connell. I am a spokesperson for the Anti-Poverty Centre and I am a disability support pension recipient. I think what welfare recipients learned tonight is that for the 4th time in a row, the Albanese government lied to us when they promised to leave no one behind. There were millions of people in poverty before Labor came to power, and there are millions more of us in I'm going to take that again, it's not millions more. There were millions of people in poverty before Labor came to power, and there are still millions of us in poverty today. Poverty in this country causes people to be hospitalised, it causes people to be homeless, it causes people to die by suicide, and the government is not taking that seriously. For welfare recipients, it feels like all that has happened is that our government has held us back. It is a deeply irresponsible budget that leaves us struggling to afford basic necessities. The government has to stop pretending that handouts for big business, corporate charities, landlords are somehow about helping us. What we need is enough income to survive, and we need real support to help us improve our lives for the long term.
So my name is Cassandra Goldie and I'm Chief Executive Officer of the Australian Council of Social Service. And tonight, our reaction to this budget is one which we always knew it was going to be an election budget. And in the lead up to tonight, there were some very important investments that this government has made in critical essential services. We've strongly welcomed the investment in more bulk billing in Medicare. We've absolutely welcomed the reduction in the price of medicines for people. The investment in public education, historic, 15 years to get here, where finally we may get to the point where public education, children in public education actually have the standard of education that they so rightly deserve, with 80% of children from low-income families being educated in our public schools. A 3-day guarantee in childcare, absolutely welcome. But in the face of a cost of living crisis, we are astounded tonight that there will be more dollars for everyone except people with the least. The centrepiece of the budget tonight is a promise of more tax cuts, $7 billion in tax cuts, which will go right up the income scale to help people on the very highest incomes in the country. And at the same time, we have nothing to help people with the very least. In the lead up to this budget, in the lead up to the last budget, in the lead up to budgets back to back, people on the ground who experience poverty, people relying on social security, have pleaded with governments to fix the adequacy of social security, to lift the adequacy of our unemployment payment in a growing cost of living crisis. JobSeeker is just $56 per day tonight, and tomorrow it will be the same. People on JobSeeker tonight are 14 times more likely to be going without one substantial meal a day in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, and tonight there is nothing in the budget to help them. The government's own expert committee and the voice of people on low incomes all over the country had said the number one priority, if you were serious about helping people in a cost of living crisis, would be to fix the adequacy of our unemployment payment, which helps millions of people every year who lose their jobs in an ongoing unknown future around what the economy will look like, and tonight they are still waiting. And I want to step back in this debate about priorities. A budget is always about priorities. I want to be clear tonight, we don't have a spending problem. We have been underspending for far too long. We have underspent on our social security system to the point where we're leaving millions of people in destitution, unable to feed themselves or to keep a roof over their head. And for too long, we've had our children in public education not getting the investments they needed. We've had crisis in aged care. We've had children neglected in childcare because we have underinvested. We have a revenue problem in this country, and tax cuts are not tax reform. We need to strengthen our revenue base to set ourselves up for the medium to longer term, to make sure that we can continue to invest, to continue to build more social and affordable housing, to make sure that we continue the reforms in childcare that are desperately needed. And we need to make sure that in this election, the top priority is what are we going to do to help people with the least. This is an election budget. I want to remind every politician tonight that around the country there are 30 electorates where people who are social security recipients, people who are relying on JobSeeker, people on the lowest incomes in the country will be asking, who do I vote for? And in those 30 electorates, there are more people asking that question than the margin in the electorate. And so I hope over the next days, as this election gets called, we will have the right contest. Not a bidding war about how we can do more tax cuts and weaken our country. We should have the debate about who is going to help people who need help the most and who will put the priorities right so that we can be really proud of who we are as a country, because tonight we did not get the signal of hope for people who are really looking for it. Thank you.
Tom Simonson, CEO of Ageing Australia. Tonight we saw some good news for aged care. We saw $2.6 billion invested in wage increases for our incredibly hard-working aged care nurses, and that's fantastic. It's a great outcome. We've seen wages increase quite substantially in aged care over the last few years, and that's a great win for our sector and for older people. What we unfortunately did not see tonight is an investment in supporting the transition to our new Aged Care Act. We had called for investments in digital readiness, in making sure that our providers are ready to implement the new Act on 1 July, and we'd also called for assistance to prepare themselves to take on huge numbers of new older people who are going to need care. We have not seen that tonight. And unfortunately that means that 1 July, which already seemed pretty close, seems even closer than it did before the announcement of the budget. So we're going to have to keep fighting this fight and explaining to government and to the community how important it is that we invest in getting these reforms right on the 1st of July. We have promised older people more and better, and we need to deliver on that. Thanks.
Claire Little, National Director, Uniting Care Australia. I want to talk about two things tonight. I want to talk about the social safety net, and I want to talk about aged care. Firstly, welcoming and acknowledging the many areas of support for people in cost of living stress, and many of the measures that have been mentioned by others tonight, the early childhood reforms, the investment in public education, the many, many areas that this government has over the last 3 years, and particularly this budget, invested in the future of this country. But I'm deeply, deeply disappointed that the one thing that we have been talking about for so long, I've stood up here now for 10 years, and every year I've said there needs to be investment in the base rate of income support. This year we thought that might happen. This year we thought the cost of living crisis was enough, that there were enough people in poverty. There was enough evidence from the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee and all of the other researchers that said this base rate is just not good enough. It's not just good enough, but it's just not high enough. So I'm really disappointed. I think tonight the social safety net has unravelled a little bit more, and the holes are getting bigger and bigger. So we will be working very hard in this election to see if we can get some sort of a commitment from a government at some point to raise that base rate in a permanent way. And secondly, aged care. The services that are within the Uniting Care network, we're the largest community services network across the country. We not only see the poverty and the struggling and the suffering of people who are on income support, but we also provide care to older Australians right across the country. We're deeply committed to this reform that is happening. It's a once-in-a-lifetime generational change. Our network providers are working really hard for the transition, but it is a challenge. And to get to July 1, we are going to have to get a lot of work done, and we're going to have to work together. We were hoping that tonight there would be some support for providers to get them through to July 1 to that finish line. We're really concerned that we're not going to make it, and we're really concerned that we will fail older people. And the last thing we want to do is to fail older people and to have this fail. So we'll be working very hard to make sure that we do this together and that we do it right. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kylie Walker. I'm the CEO of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering. We know that research and development are the keys to building Australia's health, wealth and well-being, our environmental resilience and our place in a rapidly shifting global economy. So we're pleased to see investments tonight in some of Australia's research institutions while we're waiting for the outcomes of the strategic examination of research and development. We're also pleased to see investments in green steel. We are incredibly well placed globally to be able to lead this new technology and bring it to the world. And of course education, because if we aren't investing in the diverse and science, technology, engineering and mathematics skilled workforce of the future, then we're doing ourselves short and we're doing ourselves a disservice. What we would like to see, and we would have hoped to have seen tonight, was more commitment to increasing the pace of green energy technologies and climate change. And we would have liked to have seen more commitment to building the resilience of Australians' overall research and development system, acknowledging that some of our key collaborators globally are changing, and we need to invest now in both the research workforce, the infrastructure and the access to exceptional minds both here and internationally.
Hi, I'm Dr. Danielle McMullen, Federal President of the Australian Medical Association. Tonight it was good to see what we've been promised printed in black and white. We've seen huge investments tonight in Medicare and in general practice. At the AMA, we're particularly supportive of the workforce measures announced tonight and the women's health measures. Both come on the back of long-standing AMA advocacy and will help more doctors choose general practice as a career and help us to deliver even more excellent care to women across Australia. Our support of this landmark investment in Medicare does come with a caveat. We do still need to modernise Medicare. Medicare was developed 40 years ago at a time when people had one or two simple problems to see the doctor, but now with an ageing population, more chronic disease and every consultation with a GP being more complex, we are calling for a reform of the underlying structure of Medicare to make sure that no matter how long you need to spend with the GP, we've got the time for you and that Medicare is paying its fair share. We also need stronger investments in nurses and allied health in general practice so that you can get the care from whoever you need under that one roof. There was a missed opportunity tonight to protect the health of all Australians by introducing a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. Australia is falling behind the rest of the world and this much-needed measure, despite having the recommendation of a parliamentary committee, was not put in place. And we do think that it is a way for government to have generated much-needed revenue while also protecting the health of Australians. On private health care, we've all seen the insurers fighting with hospitals and catching patients in the middle. We clearly need a private health system authority for much needed oversight over our private health sector to make sure that your private health insurance is still delivering value and we protect that critical balance of private and public health care that we value in Australia. And lastly, on public hospitals, we welcome the investment, the top-up investment in public hospitals announced tonight, but after the election, we clearly need all sides of government to get urgently back to the table to negotiate an updated National Health Reform Agreement. Our public hospitals are in logjam and patients are waiting too long in emergency departments and too long for planned surgery. So all levels of government need to cooperate on a new agreement. Tonight we saw a budget, but there's an election around the corner and the AMA's focus will be squarely on achieving the reforms we need to continue to have a strong health system in Australia.
Michelle O'Neill, President of the ACTU. Tonight's budget delivers higher income for workers, and it does that in two key ways. It shows that real wage growth is continuing under the Albanese government, and we see tax cuts for working people as well. These are important because we know the real way to deal with cost of living is for workers' wages to continue to rise. Workers' wages growth is continued out into the forward estimates, but also what we know is this particular measures are going to help workers and help wages continue to go up. One of these is banning these non-compete clauses. Now, these clauses are things that basically stop workers being able to leave jobs and go and work in another one where they'd be paid better and have better conditions. It's really having employers own workers or bond them to stay working for them, even though they might want to leave and have a better offer somewhere else. These have been outlawed in other countries around the world, and having them banned here in Australia will make a real difference, because workers who work as hairdressers, workers in disability care, workers who work in construction, in so many industries, in fact 3 million workers are affected by these non-compete clauses, and getting rid of them will see wages go up to 4% for workers as a result who are affected by these. Tax cuts are welcome. They're particularly going to be good for young workers, women workers and low-income workers. They'll see the best benefits out of these tax cuts and they're welcome. The other thing we wanted to say tonight about the budget is there's other important cost of living measures. Seeing that energy relief continue is going to be important for people paying their power bills. Also, we see the improvements in terms of being able to have 3 days early childhood education and care guaranteed. It will also help families with their budget, and things like being able to have HECS debt reduced is a critically important measure too for many young people. The last thing I wanted to mention was about jobs. We see continued investment in the future made in Australia in this budget. This is so important because it's about protecting local jobs but also growing jobs in the places we need to see them. Support for green metals, for critical minerals, for making sure that we can have a move to renewable energy in a way that creates good, quality, safe, secure jobs for the workers in communities that need to see those jobs supported and created. So in summary, working people, the unions, movement support the need to have a budget that delivers ongoing real wage growth for working people. And why that's important is because under the previous government, we saw wages stagnate or go backwards. We have seen more real wage growth in 12 months under the Albanese government than we saw in the full 9 years of the coalition government. That's why this budget is important, because real wages continue to go up for working people. Thank you.
Hi folks, there's nobody good to go. All good? Thanks. This tiny tax tweak budget is a missed opportunity to deliver real cost of living relief, like getting dental into Medicare. An extra 73 cents a day in 15 months' time won't help much when your rent has already gone up by hundreds of dollars. While everyday people are being made to wait over a year to get a very small amount of extra tax cuts, billionaires and big corporations are rolling in it right now. Under this budget, 1 in 3 big corporations pays no tax. And there's $56 billion in handouts to fossil fuels. Gina Reinhardt and Clive Palmer get billions, share in billions of subsidies now, and meanwhile, everyday people are being made to wait. It is clear that Greens' pressure works. The Greens have been calling for some time now for the tripling of the bulk billing incentive, and that measure is included in this budget. But this week was an opportunity for the government to put that in law and Dutton-proof seeing the GP for free, and also to lock in wiping of student debt by 20%. Instead of spending budget week legislating measures that would deliver real cost of living relief now, Labor teamed up with the coalition to gut our environment laws. It is crystal clear after this week that the only way to keep Peter Dutton out and get Labor to deliver real cost of living relief, like getting dental into Medicare, is by voting Greens.
This budget is a missed opportunity. In a wealthy country like ours, we can afford world-class education, world-class health, world-class childcare system. If we tax the billionaires and the 1/3 of corporations that don't pay any tax right now, we could move straight away to make visiting a GP free, to wipe out all of student debt, and to take our childcare system to the world-class level it needs to be. Instead, we have a tiny tax cut which delivers less than a cup of coffee to the average Australian, and we wait a long time for that cut. We can do much better than that in a cost of living crisis where everyday Australians, men, women and their families and households are doing it so tough. Nothing in this budget for the more than 1 million Australians who are living in poverty. Nothing in this budget for renters. We can do so much better in a wealthy country. We also need to make sure that our public service is Dutton-proofed. Dutton has a plan to cut our public sector by 1 in 5 workers, 36,000 public servants. What will that do to the services that Australians rely on in the health system, in the education system? We must protect our public sector. And this budget does not offer us any assurance that Labor is really dedicated to cutting back those greedy consultants who have such tentacles in our public sector. There is no plan in this budget for a steady reduction in consulting spending. We certainly have seen a reduction in labour hire costs and a conversion to permanent public servant jobs, a good thing. But we need to also make sure we get big consultants so expensive out of our public sector and protect it from the kind of plans that Dutton has for our public service.
Folks, this was a disappointing and underwhelming effort by the Treasurer, disappointing and underwhelming in the extreme. Firstly, this budget is far more notable for what it doesn't contain than what it does. The Treasurer could have taken the chance to make corporations, the big corporations in this country, 1 in 3 of whom pay no tax at all, actually pay their fair share of tax. He could have actually stood up to the billionaires for a change and introduced a billionaires tax. And if he'd done those things, making big corporations and ultra-wealthy billionaires pay their fair share of tax, he could have actually engaged in intergenerational legacy reforms that would have etched his name into the Australian history books. He could have actually chosen to put dental into Medicare, a massive opportunity squibbed because the Treasurer wasn't prepared to take on corporate Australia and make them pay their fair share of tax. Now, the centrepiece of this budget are income tax cuts. They are tiny and they are tardy tax tweaks from the Treasurer. At 73 cents a day, you'd be lucky to get a Chupa Chup for that, and you'd have to shop around to find one at that price. People are going to have to wait a long, long time for a very, very small tax break. And in the meantime, if you're a fossil fuel CEO, if you're a wealthy property speculator, you're popping the champagne corks tonight. If you're on income support or if you're a renter, there's nothing there for you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Nicholas Proud, CEO, Civil Contractors Federation. Tonight, Civil Contractors Federation recognise the work of the federal government to invest $15.5 billion in additional infrastructure spending. That's across 51 projects across the country. What that means is we're going to see new highways, new roads, new subdivisions that are opened up by this last kilometre infrastructure that gets spent. What we don't think about a lot of the times when we want to buy a home or we want to get a rental that's affordable is what happens to happen before those homes are built. So all of this infrastructure that's being spent is going to be quite critical to seeing a flow of housing that we desperately need. We know we're about 60 to 70,000 homes short of the 240,000 home target the government has set itself. As a country, we need to ensure that we think about that enabling infrastructure which the government's done, so we give them a huge tick from civil contractors tonight. One thing that we see as a desperate plea that we need to start to wake up to is you can't build the homes, you can't do the water, the sewage, the subdivisions, the highways, the bridges, unless you have the skills, the people that are trained. At this point, we're in a desperate situation where the country needs another 60,000 homes per annum than what we're building today. We're not skilling or paying for those skills for those roads to be constructed. So you do not see civil apprenticeships funded in this country today, which is a catastrophe if we want to actually get those housing targets built. We need to ensure that we lift the number of people in the industry with occupations that are sitting at 20 to 40% having an apprenticeship, as opposed to 60 to 70% for other occupations. We see that funding would go a long way to bringing people into the industry to build those homes, to build the subdivisions that get required before the slab's poured, and to see that we have a country that is prioritising the infrastructure, not just by funding it, which we are, which is fantastic to see these new levels of investment, but making sure that the skills that are preceding those homes being built, that's funded. Thank you.
Good evening. Chris Grice, CEO, National Seniors Australia. I guess this was positioned as a cost of living budget, and I guess for senior Australians, yeah, there's some stuff in there in terms of those that are working at present, so getting a tax cut. But as far as cost of living is concerned, well, that's 2 years away. So there's a bit of time before that's going to kick in. You know, we're pleased to sort of see, in particular around aged care, I guess greater contributions in terms of wages for nurses. That's a good sign. But not seeing sort of new money come into the aged care sector in terms of dealing with places. That's, I guess, you know, from our perspective, you know, quite concerning sort of thing. From the point of view of childcare, a bit out of left field, but we're pleased to see some funding there because that takes a bit of pressure off grandparents that are doing those childminding activities. And probably the standout for us, especially in a cost of living situation, is deeming. Now deeming is an important part of, I guess, how pensions are calculated as far as income is concerned. And yes, last year there were specific call-outs around deeming, and that the freeze on deeming would continue, and that was up until the 1st of July. No mention of deeming, and so that's very concerning during cost of living situation to not actually address the subject of deeming. So I guess it's going to make things very spicy in terms of the federal election, and we're very excited in terms of, I guess, standing up for seniors and making sure that they're certainly going to be well represented going forward. Thank you.
Dr. Ramya Raman, Vice President of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. RACGP is the peak body for GPs here in Australia. We've just seen an $8.5 billion investment into health and general practice in particular. We welcome this investment. It's been long needed, specifically for GPs, to train more GPs, and also into women's health. So it's a warm welcome for what's been long-standing and needed. It shows that the government is recognising the work of general practitioners as well as GPs. But we are concerned regarding the government's move, expecting 9 out of 10 appointments to be bulk billed. Medicare has been underfunded for decades now. patient Medicare rebates need to be increased to see the cost of care for patients to be covered. We are calling on the government to consider longer consultations. We need to see patient Medicare rebates to be increased, as well as for mental health consultations, which we see very commonly in general practice. So we're calling on the government for increase in patient Medicare rebates, for longer consultations, for the complex and chronic needs of patients, as well as for mental health consultations in increasing the patient Medicare rebates. Thank you.
Melissa Donnelly, National Secretary of the Community and Public Sector Union. Tonight's budget needed to continue the important work of rebuilding the capacity of our public services, and that's just what it has done. We've seen an investment of additional jobs in the National Disability Insurance Agency, the Aged Care Regulator, Biosecurity and Defence. All of these jobs do the core work of the public service, protecting people and supporting people. This stands in stark contrast to the opposition and their plans for our public services. Just yesterday, we had Senator Hume suggesting that the Department of Veterans Affairs was overstaffed. This is from a party who, when in government, oversaw a blowout in veterans' claims of 42,000, who a Royal Commission found had failed veterans. It is an insult to Australian veterans and their families, these suggestions that staff in the department need to be cut. But that's only part of the Dutton government's plans for the public services. Dutton and his team want to cut 36,000 jobs from our public services, 1 in 5 jobs. This will have a huge impact on frontline services right around the country. For mums and dads waiting on Medicare cards, for pensioners waiting on payments, for in our home affairs space, in biosecurity, for veterans, this will have a very significant impact. And CPSU members and the thousands of Australians who rely on public services every day will be looking to the budget reply on Thursday for Mr Dutton to be honest about where these cuts are going to come from, honest about the impact that's going to have on Australians and their families and the thousands and thousands of people who rely on our public services every day.
Hello, Trisha Sparrow, Chief Executive Officer, Council on the Ageing Australia. We were looking for a budget tonight that would deliver some relief on cost of living, and to a certain extent the budget that was delivered tonight will do that, with tax cuts for the 4.6 million people over 50 who are still working, and for bulk billing through GPs, cheaper medicines are all important things that will help older Australians. But we're going to need to see much more in the upcoming election. Older Australians are doing it tough, particularly those who are on fixed incomes. We do want to call on the government to confirm publicly that they will continue the freeze on deeming rates so that older people have certainty about their incoming pension. We also really want to see a seniors dental benefit schedule introduced and as part of Medicare to make sure that older Australians can afford to go to the dentist. They can't now, and statistics released last week showed that 16,000 people over the age of 65 ended up in hospital because they couldn't afford to go to the dentist, and that's not good enough. So we'll need to see much more cost of living relief in the federal election, and we're looking for politicians of all parties and all persuasions to commit to supporting older Australians and addressing ageism and making sure that older Australians can contribute to Australian community and be part of our society.
I'm Ashlin Horden. I'm the President of the National Union of Students. So the Prime Minister said that in this election it would be about the next generation, but young people are almost mentioned nowhere in the budget. So if the government really wants to see 80% of Australians have a tertiary qualification by 2050, they need to be thinking about the students who are currently having to think about their grumbling stomachs over their studies. The students who are lining up in what are essentially 21st century bread lines for food banks because they can't afford to feed themselves. What we've seen from this budget is there'll be less funding for youth allowance and other student payments because this will reflect the lower than expected recipient numbers. But these recipient numbers are lower than expected because almost 500,000 students are locked out of these payments because the age of independence is still too high. We really need to do better. And when students are able to access these payments, they don't even meet the poverty line. This is the time for transformative policies, not token gestures. The government needs to invest in students, not just for us now, but for the future of Australia.
So Tim Costello, the National Director of MICA Australia. We are very, very relieved that this budget saw a small increase in Australian aid. Australian aid with global aid has seen girls around the world in the last 20 years, 40% of whom weren't in education, go to 80% in education. Aid saves lives, with USAID being absolutely smashed by Elon Musk and Donald Trump. 40 billion pulled out. Some millions of people are going to die. That's not metaphorical. They are going to die. So in a budget where we know this election will focus on increasing defence spending, when other nations have cut aid to actually increase defence spending, we've been saying Australian aid has already been cut. And we are very low in generosity in the OECD. To actually have a small increase of $136 million shows that this government has principle. We call upon the opposition to actually make aid bipartisan. To say, as USAID withdraws and millions of lives are lost, Australia must step up. It won't be enough with the 136 million extra announced tonight, but at least we must hold the line. I congratulate the government in this budget of holding the line and showing empathy, compassion and commitment. In that lies true security, as General Mattis, who was in the first Trump administration, said. When Trump was going to cut aid, Mattis, the General for Defence, said, if you cut aid, you've got to buy me a lot more bullets. We know that cutting aid leads to unrest, inequality. It leads to profound conflict. So thank you, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese, for a small increase in aid tonight.
Hello, I'm Jessica Mckenzie, the Chief of Policy and Advocacy at the Australian Council for International Development. With USAID collapsing and other donors like the UK, Netherlands and Germany all culling their aid programs, Australia has decided in this budget to hold the line. We've sent a clear signal that we are not retreating from our region. Last year the budget was at $4.96 billion. This year we've seen an increase to $5.097, roughly $5.1 billion. This is nominally the largest budget that Australia's had in its history, but there's no hiding from the fact that in percentage terms we're seeing a decrease in terms of ODA GNI, which is the standard metric for how generous a country is, down to 0.18%, and we're also seeing a decrease in federal funding percentage down to 0.65%. But we're seeing some excellent packages that are targeted to meet the needs in the region. We're seeing $81 million for a regional health program that will target HIV, maternal health and reproductive rights. We're seeing $370 million for Rohingya to be able to preserve their rights on the borders with Myanmar and Bangladesh, which is much needed. We're also seeing $1 billion in economic resilience packaging going to the Indo-Pacific for skills, for financial reforms, all of which are going to help them to resist the economic shocks that are coming. But I just want to make the point that this is actually about people at its heart. We're talking about a pregnant woman who's about to give birth being able to access pain relief, or oxygen tanks that are able to get into a hospital, many of which we've seen stopped recently. So the stakes have never been higher for our region, and this is our chance to not retreat, which the government has shown clear. Jessica Mckenzie, thank you.
Richie Mercian, the CEO of the Clean Energy Investor Group. This is a budget that's bedding down a future made in Australia. But if this country is really going to hit net zero by 2050, if it's going to hit majority renewables in the next couple of years and 82% by the end of the decade, then we need to see a lot more funding and support for the renewable rollout. The future made in Australia requires additional investment. We know 70% of the investment that goes behind large-scale renewables comes from offshore. A front door to invite new investment is a welcome move by the Treasurer. What we need now is additional support to bed down that transition. We need more funding for transmission if we're going to connect up the renewables into the grid. We also need additional support to ensure that we can fast-track approvals for large-scale renewables in wind, solar, hydro and storage. If we're going to be rolling out renewables across this nation, then we need to make sure that we can plug it all in so that Australians ultimately benefit. Let's be clear, cheaper power prices come from more renewables, not less. Research by the Clean Energy Investor Group shows that renewables have put downward pressure on power prices last year. Without solar, wind, storage and hydro, we'd all be paying up to $417 more in power prices. Ultimately, if we want to see this country transition to net zero, if we want to see a true future made in Australia and green industries that are powering it, then we need to see more support for the clean energy transition.
David Pocock, Centre for the ACT. We talk about budgets being about choices, and I'm very concerned that the government has made some bad choices in this budget. We've prioritised tax cuts for the wealthy ahead of actually raising the rate of job seeker. With those tax cuts, we could have raised it to 90% of the age pension, which is in line with experts say is needed, and is in line with the kind of Australia that I'm hearing from people that they want to live in. Somewhere where we do have an egalitarian society, where we do say that everyone deserves a fair go. We've seen the government avoid any structural reform in this budget. Again, they're going with Band-Aid energy bill relief rather than actually addressing the root cause and helping households electrify, get solar on their roof, batteries on their homes, and be saving thousands of dollars every single year. With the $7 billion they've now given to the energy companies to artificially lower the price of electricity, 600,000 homes could have been electrified across this country. That is a huge start in terms of decentralising the grid, in terms of putting money into the pockets of Australians. The hero of this budget is clearly health, and I really want to acknowledge that Labor have made some very good and welcome investments in health during their term in government. As a Senator for the ACT, I'm going to keep pushing them to ensure that it actually delivers for Canberrans, because we know that things like tripling the bulk billing incentive don't work for Canberra. They're not going to even move the dial here, where we have the lowest ratios of GP to population in the country. We've got the highest gap fees and the lowest bulk billing rate. That needs to change. We need to see a Labor government deliver on their promise to actually not leave Canberra behind when it comes to health, and critically when it comes to infrastructure, which again, huge missed opportunity here in the ACT.
I'm Hannah Vardy. I'm running for the Senate with ACC Independent Senator David Pocock. I'm also a student here in Canberra. Canberra is a city of students, but this budget does not contain a plan to address the root causes of some of the challenges that will affect my generation the most. We've seen some welcome announcements from the government around reducing HECS debts by 20%. But we're still not seeing the meaningful reform that we need to the Job Ready Graduate Scheme, which has doubled the cost of our university degrees. We're also still paying interest on money that we've repaid, and we need to change the timing of HECS indexation. I'm also hearing from Canberrans about how much they deeply care about nature and protecting the people and places that we love. Nature is clearly the biggest loser in this budget. We know that we need some real ambition to tackle the climate and biodiversity crises that we're facing and end species extinction. My generation deserves to inherit a livable climate and a safe planet without threatening the species and places that we love.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'm Jessie Price, independent candidate for the seat of Bandt in the ACT. This is a budget tinkering around the edges and not getting in with heart, guts, courage to make real reform and real change that we need. The four top items, the four top issues for the people of Bandt are cost of living. We've all been given a tax cut. We're getting $5 a week, less than a coffee. Meanwhile, the #1 recommendation from the peak bodies to have increases in Commonwealth rent assistance, increasing Oz study, youth allowance, and all of these things that will help actual cost of living for the most vulnerable in our society, nothing there for them. Next up is health, and we really welcome the government's efforts, especially around women's health. But without, again, structural change, the GP bulk billing will not work for the ACT. We've got the highest out-of-pocket expenses and the lowest GP bulk billing. We need structural change to attract specialists into the ACT. With housing, there's some reform, but once again, the government has shied away from structural tax reform that will make a real difference for housing affordability for the people of Bandt. Finally, climate action, nothing of note. And for the people of Bandt, there's $50 million to upgrade the Monero Highway. Some of that's planning, it's not even actual tar and gravel. There's 80% Commonwealth funding for the Bruce Highway in Queensland. We're getting nothing for Hindmarsh Drive, nothing for access in and out of the Molonglo Valley, choke points every day for people living in Bandt. So once again, calling for real change, real reform, structural change by our government, which is why I'm running as an independent for the seat of Bandt. We've been a Labor government at the local level for a long time, a safe Labor seat. There's just not enough tension there, and it's not resulting in the reforms that we need.
Hi, Claire Miles. I'm the independent candidate for the seat of Canberra. Once again, this is a budget that has ignored the seat of Canberra. No funding for infrastructure that is desperately needed. The funding for GPs is unlikely to help Canberra at all. We need a review into the colleges to fix specialist shortages. We need funding in a range of specialists, but the colleges are keeping training numbers low. We need structural tax reform that is bold, tax cuts that are targeted, not what we have seen here tonight. $5 a week wage increase is not cost of living relief. And finally, nothing for climate and environment, the top issues for the seat of Canberra. It is time for change in Canberra. Thank you.